Rare had a very strong relationship with Nintendo back in the 90s. They were pretty incredible developers, seemingly redefining genres of every game they made. This relationship started when they reinvented the Donkey Kong character with Donkey Kong Country, a very high quality trilogy of 2D platformers with absolutely stunning graphics, quickly making that into one of Nintendo's biggest IPs. If you want to know more about those games, maybe check out my second channel, Mega Man than this. Is that Eggman Tree? Anyway, they would later take the Donkey Kong character they created, Diddy Kong, and give him his own kart racer. This game was kind of insane for its time, especially when you compare it to Mario Kart 64. It had 3 different vehicle types and an adventure mode with an actual story, which is something that Mario Kart still doesn't do. The interesting thing about Diddy Kong Racing is that it didn't actually feature other Donkey Kong characters, instead having entirely original characters, 2 of which actually were planned to have their own games. Conquer the Squirrel, which was supposed to appear in Conker's 12 Tales, but that game would go in a very different direction. And then there was Banjo, which would obviously later appear in Banjo-Kazooie. Now, if Conker's Bad Fur Day starting off as a child-friendly game wasn't weird enough, at least that game started and ended development as the same genre. Banjo-Kazooie started development off as an action RPG on the Super Nintendo titled Project Dream, starring a young boy named Edson. And as the game continued to change, the focus changed from Edson to Banjo, a character that originally wasn't even plot important, and it slowly evolved into the 3D platformer I'm reviewing today. I first heard of Banjo-Kazooie when I was around 13. I was browsing Nintendo Capri Sun's playlist, a Let's Player I was into at the time, and I saw he had a Let's Play called Banjo-Kazooie. At this point, I've never heard of this game because I grew up with a PlayStation 1, but even from that tiny resolution thumbnail that I was looking at through my CRT, I knew it was exactly the kind of game I would love. Within the first part, I was already on eBay browsing prices for Nintendo 64s. At the time, I was mostly content with just playing N64 games on the Wii Virtual Console, but that wasn't the case with Banjo because, in case you were somehow unaware, Banjo-Kazooie and Rareware as a whole was bought by Microsoft in 2002, so the idea of Banjo appearing on another Nintendo console that isn't the Game Boy Advance was just out of the question. However, that kind of changed recently with Banjo-Kazooie being announced as a DLC character for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and I was a little excited. It is! It is! Oh my god! Yes! Yes! Oh! Yes! Oh! Both my mic and life peaked at that moment, and I'm still not even entirely convinced that wasn't a dream. But seriously, props to Microsoft for allowing their character to appear on a competitor's system. I don't see Nintendo or PlayStation doing anything similar. So the Rare Microsoft buyout has been largely bad for Banjo-Kazooie and Rare as a whole, but there has been some good things that come from it, including remasters of the first 2 games on the Xbox 360, sold digitally on the Xbox Live Arcade store, and since I believe those are the superior versions of those games, those are the versions I'm going to be covering. And I guess I should say I'm only planning on reviewing the first 2 Banjo games for now. I'll get to the other ones later. The XBLA version is mostly the same game, except it's in 1080p and widescreen, has a bunch of small fixes and other changes I'll get into later. I'll talk about a few differences from the N64 original here and there, but I'll be putting most of my focus in the XBLA version since that's what I believe to be the definitive version. Banjo-Kazooie starts off with a camera pan through an evil witch's lair. The witch's name is Gruntilda, or Grunty for short, and her lair is Captain Crunch Platted. Please tell me I'm not the only one who sees this. As Grunty is making her sentient cauldron reassure her that she's beautiful, he says she's not the most beautiful because there's another girl named Tootie, who happens to be Banjo's very young little sister. So Grunty plans on putting her in a machine her assistant Klungo made to harvest her beauty. So this part of the story never sat well with me because calling a little girl beautiful just... it seems wrong. I'm sure being creepy wasn't Rare's intent. I'm sure they just needed some kind of reason to get Banjo and Kazooie to fight Grunty. But I don't know, I wish they went with something else. I mean, it's not a big deal. Just ignore that aspect, I guess. While Tootie's playing outside, Grunty swoops down from the sky on her broom to grab her. During the struggle, Banjo is still sleeping and he unfortunately doesn't wake up until she's already gone. So it's up to Banjo and Kazooie to save Tootie from Gruntilda's evil plan to take Tootie's beauty and make her ugly. Aside from the implications I already brought up, I like the story just fine. It serves its purpose, but to me the characters are what makes this plot. Banjo himself is just a nice, easygoing honeybear, which contrasts beautifully with his friend Kazooie. She's a loudmouth, angry Breagle who will take absolutely any opportunity to insult anyone at all, regardless of the timing. The only exception being Banjo, which makes me wonder if those people on the internet are more right than I wish they were. There's Bottles the Mole, who's the one that teaches you new abilities, and probably Kazooie's biggest punching bag. There's Mumbo Jumbo, a shaman that can transform Banjo into other creatures. Obviously there's Grunty. She's one of my favorite villains ever. She rhymes anytime she talks, and it's so great. She even taunts you while you're traversing through her lair, and it actually can be pretty funny. Any other character is pretty unimportant, and they're just there for one level to give you a Jiggy or something. And some are just normal everyday items with googly eyes, and that is in no way a criticism, but they're all still memorable in their own way. I think my favorite one is Gobi. This poor camel is harassed by Banjo and Kazooie several times. He's so desperate to get away from them that he's the only character to be in more than one level. The characters in this game are so charming. You never talk to any of them for all that long, but you still get a good idea of what each of their personalities are like, and I think a big part of that is the way they handle the speech bubbles. Voice acting is pretty uncommon in N64 games because of the very limited file size, and I'm still baffled on how games like Conquer manage to do full voice acting. But I really love how Rare worked around this. Text boxes work just fine, but I guess Rare thought that they just weren't interesting enough. Instead of just having text boxes, they also have character portraits and grunting. Each character has their own unique grunt and they all fit beautifully well. Some may say it gets annoying after a while, but I disagree. Maybe if the character interactions dragged a bit more, but they never go on that long. It's just a clever way to get around the lack of voice acting while still injecting a load of personality into the characters. I kind of wish other games from this era did something similar. It definitely would have made the awful voice acting that was so common in this era a smaller issue, and it also would have been funny.
There's two Jills. There's Chloe Jills. Right.
The game itself is super great. I'm just gonna say this now. Banjo-Kazooie is one of the best platformers you could possibly play. This has been the game I've been consistently comparing other collectathons to since my very first review, and for a very good reason. It's just that good. The game is centered around Banjo and Kazooie working together to pull off moves they couldn't do separately, or honestly, more accurately, Kazooie does everything while Banjo acts as deadweight. Seriously, seemingly every move in this game is done by Kazooie. The rat-a-tat-rap, the flip-flap, beak barge, talent trot, beak buster, vomiting or farting eggs. Flying, Banjo has walking normally and punching. Yeah, Kazooie is the real main character in this. As you can see, this game has a lot of very good names for his moves, and you get these moves from Bottles the Mole by just walking up to one of his molehills and talking to him. There could be anywhere between 4 and 1 molehills per level, at least until the last 3 levels where there aren't any. The moves are also pretty useful. The Talent Trot is one of the first ones you get. Kazooie lifts up Banjo and carries him on her back and runs at full speed. How strong is she? Oh my god, it's a bear! Its main purpose is to get you up steep slopes, but I mostly just use it because it makes you run a lot faster. It also makes it so you don't slide around on ice, which is really helpful. Most other interesting abilities require a collectible of some kind, like you need eggs to shoot eggs, you need the golden feathers to use the Wonder Wing, which makes you invincible at a cost of 1 golden feather every couple of seconds, and you also need red feathers to fly. Flying sounds cool, but it's limited to levels with flight pads available, and the flight controls are a bit wonky. They aren't straight up bad, at least I don't think they are, but if the game happens to ask for precision, good luck. It doesn't happen often at all, but it's pretty annoying when it does. Same with the swimming controls. The swimming controls are ridiculously loose, and grabbing anything while underwater is a massive pain, and I will definitely talk about that one Jiggy and Rusty Bucket Bay later. Thankfully, the on-foot controls are fine. I legitimately have no complaints with them, which isn't a thing I can say about many platformers from this era. The camera, on the other hand, is fine. It has this tendency to just warp around something if it gets stuck in a wall, which can be really disorienting, and the N64 version also moves in increments like Mario 64, and that's just something I've never been a fan of. They thankfully fixed it for the XBLA release, so that pleases me. Enough with the controls. The actual things you'll be doing in this game is far more interesting to talk about. Like I said before, this is a collectathon 3D platformer, the main collectible being Jiggies, these golden puzzle pieces. You need them to fill up picture frames scattered across the hub world to open up levels. A lot of the time they're just laying around, or you'll have to do some platforming challenge to get to it, or maybe they're just well hidden. Sometimes Jiggies will require you to fulfill some kind of objective. Jiggies are rarely all that hard to get aside from a few strong exceptions I'll get into later. The challenge typically just comes from trying to figure out how to get it. Another way to get Jiggies is to get all 5 of these guys called Jinjos. They're small creatures who are lost and apparently can't walk because they lack joints in their legs, I guess? They all yell things like "help me" when you're nearby, and I like that. It gives you some kind of hint where they are while still making sense in the context of the game. I think Jiggies are fine. I mean, it's a formula that's been used so many times, and yeah, because it works. But I think you need way too many of them to actually beat the game. You need 94 of the 100 Jiggies. That means you can only miss 6, in case you can't do basic math. And that obviously kills a lot of the potential freedom this game could have had, and just kind of sucks for more casual players. But I always 100% games like this because I feel wrong otherwise, so it doesn't affect me personally. But either way, this does mean you're likely to experience some of this game's lesser moments. There's also Mumbo tokens. You need to give Mumbo these for the transformations. You don't need to get all of them, there's plenty of them. I think I had well over 10 by the end of my playthrough. But I'm not a fan of the actual transformations themselves because they're kinda lame. They're almost always just a way to fit yourself into small holes or move around in deadly water, and that's just so uninteresting considering how cool of an idea it is. There's some differences here or there, like the termite can go up really steep slopes and the crocodile can bite, but I really don't feel like that's enough of a distinction. The walrus and pumpkin are straight up the same, no functionality differences at all. The only legitimately cool one would be the bee because you can fly. But you can only access a quarter of the level with this transformation. The transformations aren't bad, like I'm never hating my time when I am one, but they're a definite missed opportunity, and I can't help but wonder why they're in this game at all if they're going to do so little with it. A collectible that extends your life bar would be the empty honeycomb pieces. Every 6 of them gives you 1 more hit point. Except for the last 6, these don't. I guess they didn't expect you to actually get all of them, I don't know. I like the idea of being able to upgrade your health in a platformer. I oddly don't see that too often for some reason. I mean, it's such a basic mechanic, but I can't think of that many 3D platformers that do it. So it's nice to see it here. Another one of the main collectibles are the musical notes. There's 100 of them in each level, and you're going to need them to open up new sections of the hub world. They're pretty similar to the gems in Spyro in that there's a lot of them in each level, and you're going to get all of them if you're a completionist like me. Unlike the gems in Spyro, there's no way to know where the last few notes are without scouring the level, which, as I went over way back in my Spyro 1 video, isn't fun, and I would have liked some kind of hint system like the Gem Finder in Spyro, or like that one tonic in Ukulele. Unfortunately, if you're playing the N64 original, all notes you collected go away when you die, and I kinda hate that. Losing all notes as a punishment isn't fun, it just makes retraversing previous areas tedious. To be fair, you kinda keep any notes you collected, kinda. So if you die at like 75 notes, the game will add 75 more notes to your game total, but if you want to exceed that number, you're gonna have to recollect 75 notes again to get back to where you were. So in other words, the notes are treated more like a score rather than a collectible. Thankfully, the XBLA version fixed this, and is easily the biggest reason why I think this is the version to play. I like the notes overall. I think the game would feel empty without them, and they do a good job at leading to new areas. I just think the score system in the N64 version sucks, and I would have liked a hint system to prevent aimless wandering around. Thankfully, that only happened once in this playthrough. The game has plenty of levels and even a hub world. The hub world would include Spiral Mountain, which is mostly just a tutorial area in Grunty's lair, the meat of the hub. It's full of hallways, tunnels, secrets, and enemies. I think it's an okay hub world. I don't know how good of a job I can do explaining this, but I feel like Grunty's lair is a bit disjointed. I don't mean how it has loading zones. It's an N64 game, it'd be ridiculous to expect no loading. No, what I mean is I don't think the areas transition all that well into one another. At least not all the time. Like, I have a hard time remembering where Mad Monster Mansion is located because the surrounding area doesn't resemble anything you'd see in Mad Monster Mansion. Same with other levels like Gobi's Valley or Treasure Trove Cove. What I'm saying here is, I have a hard time remembering where all these areas are despite this being my 6th playthrough because unless these levels leak out to the loading zones preceding them, these loading zones feel like they could be interchangeable, and therefore are harder to remember. Like, Rusty Bucket Bay has a flooded room leading up to it, so it's easier to remember this way leads to Rusty Bucket Bay, but Mad Monster Mansion's preceding room is a lava cave and obviously there's nothing mansion-y about that. This probably seems like a dumb complaint to some people, it's just something I think they could have done to make the layout a bit more memorable, or at least something else that gives off the same result. I don't typically have this problem with other platformers because most don't have multiple loading zones, or if they do, there's usually not many. Banjo-Kazooie is the exception, and I just think having the levels leaking out a bit more would be a good way to circumvent this. The levels themselves thankfully don't have any problem like this because they're much smaller, and I don't mean that in a bad way at all. The levels' layouts are pretty easy to remember and you never get lost, and you should never be in a level all that long unless you just get really unlucky with the notes, but aside from that, the longest you should be in a level is around an hour if you're a skilled player, and that's the most. The majority of levels are closer to around 30 minutes. I like this because it keeps the game moving, because you're never in a level for all that long, which aside from Spyro is not a thing you typically see in collectathons like this. You're usually in levels for much longer. I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with slower paced games, it's just that I don't see faster paced games done nearly as often in the collectathon genre. The general level design is overall very good. It does an incredible job of making this game a lot of fun to explore these levels with all these secrets they have everywhere. Stuff like this is why the collectathon genre is my favorite. You know that feeling you get in some games where you just try a thing wondering if it's gonna open up a whole new area and it does? Yeah, Banjo-Kazooie is full of stuff like that, and I live for that feeling. The levels are all so tightly designed, I really love them. Some of the better levels would be Treasure Trove Cove and Gobi's Valley. I just love the theming in both of these. I love how Treasure Trove Cove has a shark that chases you down with an obvious Jaws song parody playing. And I'm just kind of impressed they managed to make a fun desert level. I don't know if it's the boring theming or annoying hazards that tend to plague desert levels, but I'm just not typically into those kind of levels at all, but Gobi's Valley manages to be one of the very few exceptions. This is a genuinely fantastic stage with a lot of fun exploration, puzzles, characters, and Gobi abuse. But man, easily my favorite of these levels would be Freezezy Peak, Mad Monster Mansion, and Click Clock Wood. I'm honestly not sure which level I like more. I think it's actually a tie between these three. Freezezy Peak is my absolute favorite snow level ever. You climb up a giant Christmas tree, kill snowmen, climb snowman, harass a walrus, and deliver presents to children for their deadbeat dad. In other words, everything I'm looking for in a Christmas level. I just love how it embraces the Christmas holiday, and that's surprisingly not a thing I see in snow levels too often. Plus, I just kinda love Christmas, so seeing stuff like this makes me happy. Mad Monster Mansion is similar to Freezezy Peak in that it's a level based off a popular holiday, obviously being Halloween. I've always been a fan of cartoonish horror levels in video games, and Mad Monster Mansion is easily the best I've played. I just love the concept of breaking in and out of a haunted mansion by climbing up from the outside and breaking through the windows. Especially when they decide to make one of those rooms inexplicably massive. I think my favorite part of this level would be the flower pot to say something that probably shouldn't be in an E-rated game.
Thank you.
Apparently they're actually saying thank you, but I don't hear that. I hear the other thing. This level just does an absolutely incredible job with oozing with Halloween, and legitimately my one and only criticism is the ghost giggle whenever you get too close to them, and that gets annoying. Oh, and you turn into a pumpkin so you can get flushed down a toilet, so you can grab the Jiggy that's in a pile of feces. I mean, if SpongeBob can get away with it. Click Clock Wood is probably the coolest idea for a level in the game. You climb up a giant tree in not one, but all 4 seasons. Some might say that this gets repetitive like my friend Dylan, but have you seen his Mario 1 gameplay? I'd hardly say his opinion's valid. But seriously, I think the seasons make the tree different enough, and I just think the idea is too cool for me to care. They make really great use of it too, like how you need to take care of this bird in each season so it can grow up to be a full-grown eagle. Or how you grow a flower complete with more Gobi abuse. Heck, even the bird enemies become bigger in each season before leaving for the winter. There's a ton of other examples too, those are just my favorites. Oh yeah, a good tip for this level is this game expects you to go down the tree safely to avoid fall damage, but Banjo's invincible during the bounce he does after a Breagle Bash, so you can abuse that to avoid fall damage. You can do this at any point in the game, it's just the most useful in this one stage, so I thought I'd bring it up here. Some other levels aren't bad, they're just not my favorites, like Mumbo's Mountain is a very nothing level. It's the very first level in the game though, so I guess I didn't really expect much to begin with. I mostly like Bubble Gloop Swamp, I just really hate Mr. Vile's minigame. You have to eat more of the right colored Yumblies than him, but the problem with it is the camera is so zoomed in you can't really see where any of them are, making this feel almost luck-based. If they just showed the entire area at once by having a bird's eye view, I really wouldn't have a problem with this, but they didn't, so I hate it, and it's one of my least favorite parts in the game. Oh, and I really don't like the Tip Top Choir, but that's mostly because I have the memory of a goldfish and have to write down the order. I would imagine if you're a functioning human being, unlike me, you can remember it just fine. Though this giant turtle's scream of pain does kind of make up for it because it sounds like Homer Simpson. Clanker's Cavern is just kinda okay. There's a lot of swimming, and like I said, this game's swimming control sucks, so that's a major hit against this level. Other than that, it's fine. I like the idea of a giant robotic shark that acts as a garbage disposal for Grunchy. You also get to explore the insides of Clanker, and it's oddly gory. Not a bad level, it's just far from my favorite. I think the only level I straight up dislike would be Rusty Bucket Bay. I purely dislike it because of the engine room, and it's because of the ridiculously tight platforming in it, and though this game controls well, it wasn't designed for platforming like this. It's just so easy to fall off and die, and may I remind you of the extreme punishment for dying in the original. It especially doesn't help when the game forces you to speed run through this part because of that other Jiggy. This one's easily the hardest Jiggy in the game. Not only do you have to run through the engine room at full speed, but you also have to reach the propeller before the timer runs out, and it's even a challenge to get out of it because of the swimming and camera. This is almost always a level that takes my first life, but I guess I was lucky in this playthrough because not only did I not die in this level, but I didn't die in this entire playthrough somehow. That's a first. Anyway, the engine room is the only real reason I hate this level. The rest is fine, I just hate that one part. One thing that Rusty Bucket Bay has going for it is the music. Actually, every level has the music going for it. This game has an unnaturally catchy soundtrack, and I don't know how. Grant Kirkhope is the mastermind behind this game's soundtrack, and I promise you that pretty much any song he composed for the entire Banjo series is the kind of music that will get stuck in your head for weeks. Spiral Mountain is probably the most iconic song in the series, and for a good reason. It's one of the first songs you hear, and oh my god, I love it. If for some reason Freezy Z Peak was the only song I could listen to during the entire month of December, I would be very okay with that. Mad Monster Mansion is like half the reason why I love that level so much, and that's saying a lot. Click Clock Wood's spring theme is legitimately one of the catchiest songs I've heard in my entire life. I especially love how the music changes depending on where you are, like how the music becomes much more aquatic when you're underwater, or how the music just disappears when you're in the highest point in Treasure Trove Cove. Grunchy's Lair has a variant for every level in the game. That's insane! Greg Kirkhope did such an excellent job in this game's soundtrack, and I love how they keep on bringing him back for any Banjo project. One nice extra thing you can do is play these timed puzzle challenges called Bottles Bonus Games. They're jigsaw challenges that progressively get harder by rearranging the pieces more and more, or even flipping them. The later ones can be pretty tough, but they're the same each time, so you can learn them better with each attempt, though the final one really put me through some hell. The reward you get are codes you can enter in the Sandcastle and Treasure Trove Cove. They mostly just do things like give Banjo big feet or hands, or even a giant head. Why is it pulsating? But the last one makes it all worth it. Banjo becomes a washing machine. His abilities aren't even different, he's just a washing machine now. This is so stupid and I love this, I want this in every game now. The only major downside is you lose access to the codes when you turn the game off, and I don't know why. Fun fact, when I was recording this part, I quit the game when I was in Treasure Trove Cove thinking it would be faster, but I completely forgot that the game doesn't save the codes, so I had to do the first 5 all over again. That was fun. The graphics are also really good. This is definitely one of the better looking N64 games out there, and the XBLA version, unsurprisingly, looks even better. Though I do have some complaints with the XBLA version. I don't like how the life icon uses the in-game models. The original used renders and they just look better. For some reason the game lags really hard in this one spot in Clanker's Cavern. This is a literal N64 game on an Xbox 360. There's no reason to do that. Though that's literally the one time it does that, so like whatever, I just find it confusing. The cutscenes even pause in really awkward spots, and the curtains don't even move like it does in the original when Tootie's getting kidnapped. There's a few scenes that were squished back to 4x3, and Banjo screws up this jump in this cutscene. Well, he didn't do that in the original. None of those are huge issues at all though, and all the positives vastly outweigh them. The game is now on widescreen, which is obviously great for modern displays, has much better draw distance, runs at 1080p or 4K for playing on Xbox One X, and 60 FPS, though my capture card only records in 30, so you're just gonna have to take my word for it. Oh yeah, they even added leaderboards to show you how long it took to beat the game and compared to other players, which is actually really cool, and I kinda wish that was in more games. It's just nice knowing exactly how fast you are compared to everyone else and to compare your times to previous playthroughs. Like my last playthrough was around 5 hours and 40 minutes, but this one was only about 5 hours, and wow, that's a pretty big improvement. Other than that, there's a lot of small changes that aren't necessarily better or worse, like all the Nintendo logos were scrubbed and replaced with Microsoft logos, which is understandable, but feels wrong. The text font is different, which I can understand after seeing how much the original font is. Why? In that Conker's 12 Tales poster in Rusty Bucket Bay, it was replaced with Bad Fur Day 1. Neat. The XBLA version looks better in just about every way. However, the N64 original still looks great, so the whole note thing is the only real thing that makes me not want to play the original again. Though, don't get me wrong, all that extra stuff is really nice. This game isn't really known for its bosses, mainly because there aren't really any. There's a Hermit Crab in Treasure Trove Cove, but it makes the bosses in Spiral 1 look threatening by comparison, so I wouldn't even count that. The actual final boss, though, is definitely an exception. Before you can get to the final boss, you have to complete Grunty's Furnace Fun. It's a giant board game with different kinds of spaces. There are spaces that ask you general questions about the game, spaces that make you beat a harder version of an existing challenge, and spaces that can be any of those things, except if you happen to fail it, you die instantly. If you fail any of the other ones, you just take a hit, which isn't a huge deal because there's a bunch of honeycomb pieces scattered everywhere. I always use Joker cards that skip the instant death ones for obvious reasons. Oh, I forgot one! There's also the Grunty spaces. The Grunty spaces are questions about Grunty herself, and the kicker? They're different every playthrough. The way you get these answers is by talking to Grunty's sister, Brentilda. You can find her in several spots throughout the lair, and she'll tell you a few facts about Grunty each time. Or you could be like me and just guess your way to victory, which is what I honestly recommend. Finding Brentilda and writing down stuff just doesn't sound like fun at all. Even the guy who put this in the game thinks it sucks, so yeah. Other than that glaring issue, I like Grunty's Furnace Fun fine. It's genuinely a creative and unique idea, and the concept of the final boss forcing the heroes through what's essentially a game show is the exact kind of charm that gives this game the glory that it's held for the last 21 years. It's just that one thing really brings this whole thing down, unfortunately. After that's over, Banjo-Kazooie save Tootie, not without Kazooie insulting her of course, and they go home to celebrate. During their celebration they realize Grunty still has a beating heart, and we need to fix that. And Banjo and Kazooie go back to finish the job. At this point, if you happen to have enough notes and jiggies, you get a lot of extra stuff like full refills and even double health, so maybe do that. Especially because this fight is actually kinda hard. I normally don't care for boss fights and platformers. Most of the time they're just a thing you kinda have to do to get out of the way, but there's definitely some exceptions out there, and I strongly believe this fight is one of them. I'm a sucker for fights with multiple phases that end up being actually kinda hard, and Grunty is a shining example of that. This fight even ends with a giant Jinjo Terminator called the Jinjonator, so it's basically a perfect fight. You also get a fast-paced climactic remix of Grunty's lair, so yeah, perfection. Okay, if I were to offer real criticism, I think the phase where you're just flying around and bashing Grunty is kind of boring. It's really easy to avoid attacks, but it's kind of hard to hit Grunty, so that part sucks. But whatever, Jinjonator. The game ends with Grunty getting crushed by a boulder and Banjo and friends relax on a beach. If you happen to get everything Mumbo teases the next game, Banjo 2... Oh yeah, that was changed for this version. Mumbo, no. In all seriousness, the idea of the game teasing the sequel is pretty cool. Would have been embarrassing if that sequel didn't come out. Good thing that didn't happen. Oh, and I love the credits in this game, by the way. They give each of the developers a unique banjo-sounding name while attaching them to one of the characters throughout the game. The problem with this, though, is in the XBLA version, the credits are like 3 times the length, and it's kind of ridiculous. Like, I have nothing against crediting the people behind the XBLA remaster. I mean, obviously they deserve credit, but for the sake of not making things incredibly drawn out, they should have just went with traditional credits for the new devs. So, that was Banjo-Kazooie. In my opinion, it's one of the best 3D platformers out there. I compared it to Spyro a few times because it's a similar game, just on a competitor system. And, what I will say is, in case you couldn't figure out, yeah, I do prefer Spyro. I'm sure there's some bias in there, but I kind of just like the faster pace. But I can 110% understand why someone would prefer Banjo-Kazooie. This is basically me saying Banjo-Kazooie is one of the best 3D platformers out there. If I can understand why someone would prefer that over Spyro, yeah, I have a high opinion of Banjo. So the N64 original, while, you know, it's good, obviously, it's still Banjo-Kazooie, but my problem with it is the notes, and that really sucks, and that was really frustrating my first playthrough. So if you can, I would say go for the Xbox Live Arcade version, but you need an Xbox 360 or an Xbox One and a copy of Rare Replay if you want to play it. And I mean, the Xbox makes good systems. It's just that if you're a fan of platformers, and mainly platformers, there's a very good chance you don't have one of their systems. Now, when Banjo was announced for Smash, I was hoping that would lead to Banjo-Kazooie on the Switch, but when Banjo actually came out, Sakurai advertised the Xbox One, which, don't get me wrong, I'm happy to see Nintendo do that. I do think Microsoft deserves that after lending one of their characters, but to me that was basically them saying that no, it's not coming to Switch, and that makes me sad. I mean, I was wrong about there not being a Battle Bikini Bottom remake, so maybe I'm wrong about this too, but I just don't see it, unfortunately. So yeah, that was the video, and Banjo is good and you should play it. Play the N64 original if you have to, but try to play the Xbox Live Arcade version. I mean, 360s go for really cheap, but I understand why you wouldn't want to get an Xbox 360 for a game that's 20 years old, so yeah, but play it somehow, eventually, I don't know, just do it. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time when I review Banjo-Tooie. I don't know how long that video is going to take because I've never beaten that game, and that is a very long one, and I don't know it very well, so let's see how that goes. Bye. This is why it's worth owning original hardware. On emulators, you miss out on stuff like this.